popular spot. Damn it. Blows apart.
Chris is gonna run over our buoy.
Perhaps nowhere else in the world is as much gold hidden beneath the deep waters of the Bering Sea. That's why a $1.5 million bet was placed on 1,000 acres of seafloor without even seeing a single ounce of gold. This gamble is something only a businessman, not a crazy-level visionary like Shawn Pomrenke, could pull off. What people call risk, Shawn calls opportunity. It all started when Shawn decided to revive an old junked dredge, the Myrtle Irene. The machine had been rusting on the shore for years, and no one was willing to move it. But Shawn saw a beast in her, a machine that could change the history of the Bering Sea. So he invested $800,000, approx. $800,000, and turned her into a monster gold sucker. It took Shawn 3 weeks, 7 welders, 4 mechanics, and 20 hours of continuous work to rebuild her. A new engine, double suction power, and a 36-inch industrial hose were installed. When the Myrtle Irene hit the water, it produced tens of thousands of dollars worth of gold on its first voyage, literally shaking the entire Nome. Everyone then realized that Shawn's gamble could truly turn into gold. But the more gold was found, the more rivalries erupted. Physical fights broke out over the richest seafloor ground. People were pushing and shoving each other, shouting, and one scene even led to jail. Chaos reigned on the ground, but Shawn remained calm because his focus was on one thing: dominance. His words were simple: whoever stops is dead. But the real fear and twist began when Myrtle Irene's sonar detected a strange metallic structure on the seafloor, one that didn't look like any old wreck. The temperature suddenly dropped, noise readings spiked, and Shawn instantly knew this was no ordinary object. Whether this discovery would make or break his entire empire, no one knows yet. And one more thing straight: people watch the video in shock but don't subscribe. Brother, if you don't want to miss the next part of this discovery of Shawn, hit subscribe. Otherwise, the real truth will slip away from you. The day Shawn Pomrenke decided to place a $1.5 million bet without taking samples or testing the seafloor literally shook the entire mining industry. In the small town of Nome, news spread like wildfire. How could one man, a diver miner, take such a huge risk? People began to say that Shawn was perhaps overconfident or even crazy, because the ocean floor is never predictable. But Shawn had zero hesitation on his face, as if he knew deep down that this land was different from all the others. 1,000 acres of seafloor is no small number. This area is equivalent to an entire underwater city, where some places offer pockets of gold and others offer absolutely zero returns. Normally, any mining company would first spend months sampling, mapping, surveying every inch with sonar, and then invest. But Shawn ignored this textbook process, relying solely on his gut feeling and experience. His belief was simple: the greater the risk, the greater the reward. Industry experts laughed at this, but those who know Shawn's track record understood that this decision was not taken lightly. Shawn's calculations weren't based solely on luck. He had conducted high-level studies of current patterns, previous seasons' gold flow, and the shifting sands of the seafloor. But even the top experts believed that this data still didn't justify investment. Gold is unpredictable. One scoop brings thousands of dollars, and the next scoop is completely empty. If Shawn's prediction had been wrong, $1.5 million would have literally sunk into the water. The pressure of crew, fuel, permits, repairs, all of it could have exploded at once. Yet Shawn said, "If I stop, someone else will come and take my gold." The story became even more interesting when other miners secretly began their own survey of the area. But the sonar readings weren't clear enough to make a confirmed prediction. Some divers suspected the area might be a leftover from an old operation. Some thought the seabed was too flat to hold gold. But Shawn's confidence was on a different level, as if he was seeing something the rest of the world couldn't. And this confidence later became his greatest strength. When the season finally began, this $1.5 million gamble had become more than just an investment. It had become a psychological war. People wanted to see whether Shawn would emerge victorious or bring down the entire industry. Tension was as intense as the icy winds of the Bering Sea. And when Myrtle Irene landed, the entire town was glued to the screen, because it was about to be revealed whether Shawn's gamble was genius or the beginning of ruin. The Myrtle Irene was once a massive dredge parked on the shores of Nome, but time slowly transformed it into a dreary, desolate machine. Years of cold, strong winds and salt water had eaten away at every sheet of metal. The layers of rust were so thick that it was difficult to see its original color. From a distance, it resembled an abandoned ship, as if it itself were ashamed of its past failures. The machine's internal parts were broken in half, hoses were cut, and the cabin glass was shattered in places. Many said that when the wind blew against the machine at night, it sounded as if an old ghost was groaning from within. Local miners jokingly called it metal kaboot because it looked so old and useless that no one was willing to touch it. Everyone assumed that the Myrtle Irene's next destination would be the junkyard. The people of Nome often remarked, "It will never work." What he said wasn't just a joke, it was a harsh reality. The cost was so high, the repairs so complex, and the conditions so poor that reviving it was considered almost impossible. Old machinery usually never regains its power, especially in a place as unpredictable as the Bering Sea. But looking at the condition of the Myrtle Irene, it seemed as if it wouldn't even survive a full season in the water, let alone extract gold. Looking at the Myrtle Irene, one felt the dread one feels in abandoned places, where everything tells a story of its past. Inside the cabin, old papers were scattered, a rusted coffee mug sat in a corner, and a white layer of salt coated the control panel. It seemed as if a crew had suddenly abandoned it, as if something had happened to the machine that made it impossible to return. When Shawn first stood before this ghost-like dredge, people laughed. They said, "This machine is already dead. It can't be brought back to life." But Shawn's eyes held a spark no one else had. Where the world saw junk, Shawn saw a monster, a beast that, in the right hands, could spew gold again. Shawn Pomrenke's vision wasn't simple. He wanted to revive a machine the entire town had considered dead. The Myrtle Irene was in such poor condition that people were afraid to even touch it. But Shawn had one thought in mind. If this dredge could find the right hands, it could mine gold again. From there, a $1 million resurrection project began, one that would become one of the Bering Sea's biggest gambles. For this project, Shawn assembled an expert crew, 7 welders, 4 mechanics, and additional fabricators. They worked 20-hour shifts for 3 weeks. Sparks flew everywhere, grinders whirred, and heavy metal plates reverberated through the cabin. This wasn't a simple repair job. It was an operation to bring a giant machine back to life. The list of upgrades was so extensive that normal miners couldn't even imagine. Shawn removed the old engine and installed a high-torque diesel system that generated double the power. The suction system was completely replaced with a 36-inch industrial hose that could pull twice as much material as the old system. Flotation tanks, pump motors, wiring, controls, everything was rebuilt as if a new-age beast was being created. A cost. Breakdown would be shocking. Welding plus structural work, $120K. New engine plus torque upgrades, $250K. Suction line plus pumps, $180K. Labor, emergency fixes, fabrication, $200K. When the total was added up, nearly $1 million had been spent. The Nome crowd was shocked to hear this number. But for Shawn, it wasn't about money. It was about legacy and domination. When the final bolt was tightened and Myrtle Irene stood up, the machine seemed alive, as if a sleeping giant had finally awakened. The crew was excited beyond exhaustion, knowing their next move was going to make history. Shawn stood in front of the cabin and simply said, "Now let's see if this beast remembers to eat gold." The first day of a season is always tense, but this time there was a different tension in the air. When Myrtle Irene entered the water, it felt as if the entire Nome community was focused on this machine. Sonar screens turned on and raw images of the seafloor began to appear. Shawn gave the command in a calm voice, "Drop the cutter arm. Let's take the first bite." Everyone's heart clung to the first scoop, because that's the moment that decides whether a $1 million gamble is a success or a disaster. As soon as the bucket cut the sand, the suction system activated and slurry began to rise. The crew's eyes were fixed on the gold indicator. A few seconds later, a faint glow appeared on the tray, and Shawn, wearing binoculars, shouted, "Guys, I see color!" As the slurry cleared, the tray filled with bright, coarse gold flakes. Within the first 20 minutes, nuggets worth $10,000, $12,000 had been extracted. Sonar bars were spiking repeatedly, indicating large pockets of gold beneath. The crew was in shock. Those who had called the machine junk were now shouting with joy. Shawn, emerging from the cabin, laughed and said, "I told you, this machine wasn't dead." The amount of gold Myrtle Irene extracted that day was etched in gnome mining history. And then everyone realized this was just the beginning. When Myrtle Irene's maiden voyage unearthed record-breaking gold, the entire gnome was literally shaken. The other miners' reactions were a mixture of shock, jealousy, and anger. Shawn had extracted as much gold in a single scoop as miners extract in a whole season. The value of the ground skyrocketed overnight, and everyone believed Shawn had captured the richest seafloor spot. As swift as this success was, rivalry erupted just as quickly. Nome is a small mining town where everyone knows each other, and competition has always been tough. But this time the situation was different because Shawn had a machine and a spot that everyone wanted. Some miners began moving their dredges closer to Shawn's area to capture the leftover gold. Crowded traffic began to build in the water, and tensions grew louder and louder. Arguments were blaring on every radio channel. One day, tensions reached their peak when two competing crews claimed the same marker. Loud shouting erupted on the shore. "You're crossing my line! Back your vessel up!" And then things got physical, pushing, shoving, and finally a straight-up knockdown fight. The scene was so aggressive that everyone took out their phones and started recording. In the midst of the fight, one competitor yelled, "You're already going to jail," and another, "We'll see. We're pressing charges right now." Even the Coast Guard had to intervene as the situation was spiraling out of control. Mining rivalries were common among gnomes, but turf wars of this scale were rare. Everyone secretly believed this was due to Shawn's massive gold finds. People were saying, "Mr. Gold has driven everyone crazy." This season was shaping up to be the most volatile in gnome history. Shawn Pomrenke's name stood out in this rivalry. His consistency was so strong that competitors couldn't match him even if they wanted to. Every season, Shawn somehow came out on top, no matter how bad the sea conditions. His experience, instincts, and courage to take risks put him far ahead of everyone else. That's why people respected him and feared him. Every miner in Nome knows that Shawn's sense of gold is unmatched. He can find gold in places where even sonar readings are confused. This uncanny skill was the biggest reason for earning him the title Mr. Gold. He became the benchmark not just for a miner, but for an entire industry. While others struggle in a single season, Shawn consistently broke records for multiple seasons. A combination of fear and respect had built up around him. Competitors thought twice before facing him because Shawn's aggressive style and clever planning combined to make him unbeatable. Crew members would also say, if Shawn picks a ground, then there's something big underneath it. This saying slowly became a legend. People began following Shawn's footprints on mineral maps, hoping they too would find some gold luck. Shawn's name resonated with the public and TV audience on a different level. Each episode brought a new challenge, a new fight, and a new twist, and fans called him a modern-day gold warrior. At Nome restaurants, bars, and boat docks, people would discuss only one name, Mr. Gold. Shawn Pomrenke turned gold mining into more than just a job, but an empire. And the more gold he found, the bigger his shadow fell on the competition. This is how rivalries begin, and legends are made. For Shawn Pomrenke, Myrtle Irene wasn't just a machine. She was the heartbeat of his entire empire. After resurrection, money was being burned on her every day, every hour, every minute. The diesel fuel meter dropped so rapidly that it seemed as if the machine was drinking money, not water. An hour's fuel cost sometimes exceeded $1,000, and if the seas were rough, this amount would increase even further. The crew's pay was no less. Diver teams, welders on standby, machine operators, spotters, deck engineers. Everyone was paid on a per-hour basis. The longer the machine was in the water, the higher the payroll. If the weather suddenly turned bad or the machinery jammed, the entire day would be zero income and thousands of dollars lost. Every second could literally make money or ruin it. The pressure of maintenance was also nonstop. Myrtle Irene was as big as its problems. Sometimes a pump jam, sometimes a suction choke, sometimes an engine overheating, sometimes a flotation imbalance. A small mistake could shut down the entire operation. Shawn's biggest fear was the same: the machine being underwater, no gold being found, and money being burned. The risk level was so high that the crew's heart rate would increase with every storm cloud. Amidst all these financial and mechanical pressures, the real test for Myrtle Irene began when the sonar readings gradually began to behave strangely. At first, the crew thought it was just a minor glitch caused by the cold currents of the Bering Sea. But as the machine approached deeper pockets, a strange pattern began to appear on the sonar. Bars began to dip, readings began to skip, and signals would occasionally go blank. One evening, as the sun was setting below the horizon, the sonar operator suddenly exclaimed, "Shadow!" A strange dark patch appeared on the screen, like the one normally created by a boulder or wreckage, but it was showing movement. Someone joked that it might be a whale, but whales don't cast such a continuous shadow on the sonar. The temperature gauge also showed a sudden 3-degree drop, and it wasn't just a 1-second drop, it was consistent. Crew members checked the signals and motors, but the glitch pattern repeated itself near the same location. Each time Myrtle Irene orbited that spot, the sonar would blur, readings would jump, and a hollow thumping sound would be heard in the headphones, which one diver described as like someone knocking on the wall from below. Just as the diving crew was about to enter the water, something else strange happened. Radio signals became very weak, and the diver said he felt a sharp wave of cold below. Shawn initially thought it was just the deep water thermocline, but the thermocline doesn't distort signals. Here, sonar, temperature, and radio, all three were behaving together. Something was down there, but nobody knew what. The crew was tense, but a strange curiosity was awakening within Shawn. The more weirdness there seemed, the more gold there could be. But somewhere in the corner of my heart, a slight fear lingered, because the Bering Sea doesn't normally behave like this. The deeper we went, the closer it seemed the machine was getting to some invisible boundary. When that dark shape appeared on the sonar for the 3rd time in a row, Shawn decided to dive there. The crew was in shock, because all the glitches that occurred indicated something unusual about the bottom. But Shawn's voice was steady. "If I don't go, no one else will." When the same dark shadow appeared on the sonar for the 3rd time in a row, Shawn finally decided to go down and see for himself what was going on. Shawn knew full well how cold and unpredictable the Bering Sea waters were, but curiosity overcame his fear. The crew repeatedly warned him while putting on his scuba gear, but Shawn calmly said, "I have to see the truth." The machine halted, the lights came on, and Shawn slowly descended into the water. For the first few meters, everything seemed normal. Slight currents, floating sediments, typical Bering Sea visibility. But as Shawn reached a deeper zone, the light suddenly began to disappear. Even the spotlight's beam was being absorbed in a strange way, as if a heavy shadow was spreading like air below. Shawn adjusted his mask, but the darkness remained as thick. He had never experienced this unusual light loss before. As soon as he reached the bottom, his foot hit something hard. Clearing the sand, a metallic corner was revealed, but the shape was so unnatural that Shawn couldn't understand it for a few seconds. There were large dents on the surface, as if something huge had scraped it with its claws. The structure was round on one side, perfectly straight on the other. The symmetry was so perfect that it didn't look like the work of anything natural. Shawn felt his hand and saw that the metal wasn't cool like normal steel. It was ice cold. The surface bore long, deep claw-like marks, which nature doesn't normally make. The structure was half buried in the sand, and the rest seemed to have been pressed down by a hand and pushed in. The shape was quite odd, in some places triangular edges, in others a smooth curve, and in others a hollow cavity where light was disappearing. Suddenly, a static crackle sounded in Shawn's earphones. The crew asked, "Shawn, copy!" But the signal had weakened. The temperature gauge also showed a sharp drop, 5 degrees in seconds. Shawn took one last look, stabilized the cameras, and began to rise. His heart was pounding because the niche looked completely unrecognizable, something entirely else. Upon reaching the surface, the crew immediately downloaded the footage. Everyone was shocked. No one could recognize the shape seen in the cameras. Welders, mechanics, divers, all experts saw that it was neither iron, aluminum, nor copper alloy. The metal's reflection, dense, and surface texture didn't match any known industrial equipment. Shawn removed a sample from the machine, and the lab's analysis revealed even more strange things. The metal was conductive, but its melting point was unusually high. Iron melts at 1,538 degrees. This sample didn't melt even when it crossed 2,200 some. The crew panicked because normal mining machinery doesn't have such material properties. The divers had only one question: how did this thing get there? And the confusion increased further when a faint hum movement sound was detected in the sonar recordings. This sound wasn't from an engine or machine. It was a low-frequency pulse that sonar usually detects for aquatic life. The crew's noise stopped, and the cabin fell silent. Everyone had the same fear. Whatever was found there didn't seem to be human-made. Shawn was listening, but his expression wasn't that of a normal miner. His eyes held both thrill and worry. This discovery was bigger than gold. It was a moment that could completely change mining history, or even cause a disaster. Fearing that footage would be leaked, the crew took extra precautions on the boat. But Nome is a small town. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some local fishermen began saying that the area was already weird. People said the Coast Guard often patrolled there at night, but the reason was never clear. Local rumors said there was something else there, and the government never tells us. When Shawn pulled out old marine maps, something else came to light. On an old chart, a faint circle had been drawn over the region. Restricted waters, 1970s. A proper explanation wasn't found in the archives, but naval history mentions somewhere that this zone was once known as a military acoustic testing region. But no exact details, all redacted. Some fishermen claimed they had tried to go there years ago, but the Coast Guard turned them away for unknown reasons. Some divers said the currents there behaved completely unnaturally, as if a large structure below was blocking the water flow. All these thoughts now began to linger in the crew's minds, and tension reached a new level. When the crew sent the fitting camera inside the object, the footage took everyone's breath away. Inside the metal cavity was a long, curved chamber with no visible mechanical joints or bolts, as if the entire structure had been built in one piece. As the light entered, it began to bend strangely, and at the end of the chamber, a smooth dome appeared, its design completely out of step with human technology. Shawn stood completely silent as he watched the footage. Fear and curiosity were evident on his face. Finally, he said softly, "This shape, these patterns, this doesn't look like any mining machine. This thing didn't come naturally. And this doesn't look human-made either." Dead silence fell over the cabin. Everyone felt they had disturbed something that should have remained untouched. The camera captures an unknown marking flashing in the last frame, but as soon as it zooms in, the screen blacks out. The crew presses buttons in panic, but the signal is gone. Shawn utters just one line: "What lies below is worth more than gold, and maybe dangerous too." If you too want to know the next truth of this mystery, like, share, and press subscribe, because Shawn's story isn't over yet.